Did you know that Big Fat Liar, that Frankie Muniz movie, was written by Dan Schneider? I had no idea either until I looked at the credits and then thought about it. Yeah, it's definitely a Dan Schneider work. In the early 2000s, family-friendly comedies were a dime a dozen. They seemed to rule cinemas, except for the fact that they didn't always do so very well. In order to be really distinguished, you had to set yourself apart, like Star a Monkey. Of course, those didn't always work either. In the case of Big Fat Liar, this is one that just kinda stuck around. It was a modest hit at the time, and ever since then it's been a modest hit when it comes to home video and streaming. I watched it over the weekend and I realized something. This is actually a lot better than I remembered. Yeah, as a kid I thought it was just kinda decent, but as an adult, it's actually pretty dang good. Not great, nor is it perfect. I still think it is a pretty dang good film. And I'd say Dan Schneider's best work overall. And no, I'm not going to talk about the Dan Schneider controversies and allegations because they're exactly just that. Allegations. None of it has been firmly proven, and yes, I have seen some of the testimonies and evidence and all that sort of stuff. But here's the thing. Until it becomes 100% irrefutable, this is absolutely 100% what happened, fact, then I'm not going to talk about it, nor am I going to let that factor into how I view the movie. Also, it's not only written by Dan Schneider, it's also written by Brian Robbins, who was the creator of such shows as Awesomeness TV, and is now also the president of Nickelodeon. Oh no. But this isn't a Nickelodeon movie, nor is it a Paramount movie, or really Viacom in any way. It's Universal. You know how I know? Well, we'll get into that. So, let me tell you why Big Fat Liar is Dan Schneider's best work. For as beloved as Dan Schneider's work tends to be, there are three common things that a lot of people cite as stuff that ruins his work for them. What is that? That would be bizarre characters or horribly mean characters that try too hard to be either weird and random or unbelievably obnoxious to the point where you can't like any of them. Weird and random humor that just tries way too hard to be weird and random and tends to be one note, as well as relying on the same gimmicks over and over again. Once again, this is only more prevalent in Dan Schneider's new stuff, although the older stuff does have this too. I'm willing to admit that even though I am a bit nostalgia blind by it. Let's see if Big Fat Liar falls into this same problem. First off, what's the premise? It's about this kid named Jason Shepard, who is a compulsive liar. The guy always lies through his teeth to get out of trouble, and sometimes the lies are believable, sometimes they're not. In the end, however, he's always discovered for the liar that he truly is. He's on the verge of having to take summer school because he keeps forgetting to turn in his assignments. So he writes up a story called Big Fat Liar for a creative writing assignment, only to get hit by a limo that's being written by producer Marty Wolf, who ends up finding his story and turning it into a big movie. So yes, he steals from Jason, but no one believes Jason because of all the lies he's told. So now it's up to him and his female best friend to go to California and make Marty Wolf's life miserable until they get the rights back to Big Fat Liar. Right off the bat, I think you can tell where this is going. Obviously, two obnoxious bad characters, a selfish producer serving as the villain who clearly has no sense of morality whatsoever. Can't relate to him, can't enjoy him, and let's get a look at our main character. Come on, he's basically a juvenile delinquent. There's no way he's gonna be enjoyable in the slightest. Well, if that's what you thought, you would be wrong. Why? Well, let's start with the Jason Shepard character. He's actually pretty down to earth. He's not one of those typical, I'm the protagonist and that's all there is to me protagonists. And no, he's not perfect and nicey nice either, like say Carly from iCarly. This kid's got a problem, a really big problem. But still, he's a nice guy. He's not trying to do this to hurt people, he's just trying to do this to get himself out of his laziness. Which, at the end of the movie, he learns from. It's a growing arc for him. It's a lesson and obstacle that he needs to get through. We like him because he feels real. Kinda like Drake and Josh. They're a little bit cartoony and wacky, but they still feel like people we know. Marty Wolf is at the other end of the spectrum. He's basically what would happen if Gibby had no soul. He's just evil and maniacal, not to mention unbelievably bizarre. Paul Giamatti must have taken a page from Jim Carrey's Grinch because he's always bouncing off the walls, he's exciting, he's weird, he's goofy. but he's also very threatening as a villain. As shouty and strange as he is, I take him seriously as a threat. Because he's so powerful and important in the business, everyone around him cowers. Despite his weird behavior, no one dares point it out. No one dares stand up to him. Whatever Wolf says goes. Wolf knows this and enjoys it. I've always said that whenever an actor is having a fun time, even in a bad movie like say Batman and Robin, you can't help but have fun right alongside that actor. And this is very much the case for Paul Giamatti in this film. And the other characters aren't half bad either. Like a lot of Dan Schneider's works, they tend to be a bit stereotypical, one note, I've seen these characters before, bland archetypes that he didn't come up with, which I will say there are some of them in here, but at least they have some interesting spins on them. With the exception of the best friend, she's just kind of there to be the female best friend, and that's about it. The bully is big and dumb and not really intimidating. Plus, a lot of what he says is just funny. That old senile grandma has had a lot of the same jokes we've seen before about old senile people, but they do new things with it because they pair her with the bully character. The whole crew has a bunch of colorful personalities, and every single one of them plays into the climax. My favorite character in the entire film is actually not Marty Wolf. It's Jaleel White. Yes, Jaleel White, the same guy that played Sonic the Hedgehog and Steve Urkel. Dan Schneider tends to put a lot of adult references in his later shows like, say, Sam and Cat, that not only kids don't understand, but it's integral to the story. There's an episode of Sam and Cat called #Super Psycho that basically just parodies Silence of the Lambs. It does that thing that, say, Family Guy or Drawn Together Season 3 will do, where it entirely breaks a character just for the purpose of doing a parody. And I use parody in the loosest of quotes. It's not really a parody if you go through the motions beat for beat, just have different characters doing it. When I saw Jaleel White in here, that's kinda what I thought this was gonna be, but no, he's actually a character. They do reference Urkel and Family Matters and stuff, but you don't need to know what those are in order to get the joke. He's an actor that's trying so hard to be taken seriously. He wants everyone to love him as a legitimate artist, but he's picking awful films. He's looking for his big break in all the wrong places, and that's funny, especially with all the energy he gives, rivaling Marty Wolf. So there's the characters, but how's the writing? Even in the best shows like Drake and Josh, Dan Schneider has ended up resorting to a lot of the same one-note material, especially towards the end. But here, it's actually surprisingly varied. Of course, there's a typical Dan Schneider loud, obvious, weird, random joke. There's a lot of sight gags and a lot of over-the-top punchlines, but for every one of those, there's a quiet, subtle gag that's worked into the dialogue. My absolute favorite of these is when Jason and his best friend try to convince the receptionist at Marty Wolf Studios that they're actually his illegitimate children. That made me laugh hard. Does every joke work? No, but a vast majority of them do, and there's some real laugh-out-loud stuff in here. Even some of the loud, obvious jokes. There's a couple running gags in here, and at least they're not used too much. My favorite of them being the monster truck man. He only shows up twice, but both times he appears, it is absolutely hysterical. I don't want to ruin it, so go check it out yourself if you don't believe me. It's not like, hey look, Gibby and Goomer are doing something weird and stupid, let's stop the plot to laugh at them. These actually carry into the story, they actually have purpose, they actually have weight. That's just something you don't see from a lot of Dan Schneider works. The stories don't stop or don't solely exist just to carry a cheap gag. The gags fit perfectly into the story and fit perfectly with the characters. Then there's the gimmicks. Like I said, Dan Schneider likes to use a lot of archetype characters and stock plots. And I'm not gonna lie, Big Fat Liar has a lot of those elements too. The story is only a little bit creative and the characters are very stock. However, it's what they do with them that really changes it. For example, did you know that Big Fat Liar is actually based off of The Boy Who Cried Wolf? Think about it. A shepherd, Jason Shepherd, constantly lying and getting people to fall for his crazy schemes, until one day a wolf, Marty Wolf, comes along and actually causes a problem and he tries to tell everybody but nobody believes him. See? That's pretty clever, right? The stock characters do go through some stock plots, but you kind of feel for them. Again, Jason is allowed to grow. He's allowed to change. He doesn't just go from the beginning of the film to the end of the film staying the same. He grows like real people do, and he talks like real people do. He'll occasionally have a line where you kind of think, yeah, some studio head wrote that, or some writer in a dark, depressing office wrote that, but those are pretty rare. Similarly, The Best Friend also sounds like this. They also play a lot with the fact that this is a family film by just going so over the top with the cliches that it's just insane. The sister character is barely in the film, but obviously the parents think she's a nice goody-goody teen, and right up to the point where she has a shirt that just says innocent. But of course, we all know that that's not the case, and the joke is just how obvious that this twist was. Big Fat Liar knows what it is. It knows it's a cheesy family film, but it has a blast doing it. Unfortunately, this is the one aspect where I will say it's the weakest of the three. Even though it does poke a lot of fun at some of the cliches, it also falls into a fair few of them, like shoehorning in a chase scene at the very end, although I did find it a bit enjoyable, having tons of product placements for Coca-Cola, having a scene where they just stop the plot to go running around Universal Studios and not in any way that furthers the plot like it does in the climax. Nah, this really more just feels like, hey, come go to Universal Studios. It's fun here. Sure, that helps them get to the Marty Wolf Studios, but you could have written that out entirely. And then, of course, we also have that montage where they're trying on clothes and doing all these crazy things in the back studio where they're hiding. They don't do anything with this, they don't do any jokes, they just kind of stop the plot for it. So again, I have to knock Big Fat Liar for that. But aside from those issues, I'd say this really stands out as something special. This shows that Dan Schneider is fully able to overcome some of the problems he keeps falling into. These pitfalls don't always have to be there for him. Heck, if he still had a career after all this stuff, and he wanted to stop doing those repetitive sitcoms and do something like this again, I wouldn't mind it. He's got ideas. He's proven that he has some potential. Oh well, we could always dream. I gotta say, folks, check out Big Fat Liar again if you haven't already. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And hey, if you're not, whatever you do, please don't call me a big fat liar. I know that was easy, I just had to do that as a closing line. Well folks, that was my review of Big Fat Liar. I hope I've proven how this is actually one of Dan Schneider's best works, if not his absolute best. He's just avoided so many of the pitfalls that he constantly falls into in his other things. But what did you guys think of Big Fat Liar? Did you like it? Did you see it even? Comment below and let me know, because as always, I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Good night, everybody.